The sharp click of heels echoed through the sterile corridors of Sterling Tech, each step resonating with a finality that made Sarah's chest tighten. Her heart pounded against her ribcage as she approached the corner office where Greg Morrison, CEO of the company she'd poured 8 years of her life into, sat waiting. The memo had come just an hour ago, immediate meeting with HR and executive management. In corporate speak, those words never meant anything good. Sarah pushed open the heavy glass door, her eyes immediately locking with Morrison's steely gaze. At the conference table sat Cheryl from HR, already arranging papers in that meticulous way she always did before delivering bad news. The air conditioning hummed too loudly, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in her ears making everything else seem muted. "Take a seat, Sarah," Morrison said, his voice carrying that practiced neutrality executives used when they were about to destroy someone's career. She knew this dance too well, the carefully rehearsed script, the empty platitudes about company restructuring and nothing personal. Only this time, she could see it in their faces, this wasn't about budget cuts or performance reviews. Cheryl cleared her throat, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "We've decided to make some changes to our department structure." "You're firing me," Sarah interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. The words hung in the air like smoke, visible but impossible to grasp. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He hadn't expected her to cut straight to it. "We're bringing in fresh leadership for the marketing division," he finally admitted, avoiding her eyes. "Someone who can bring new perspective and connections." "The CEO's daughter," Sarah stated flatly. It wasn't a question. She'd seen the signs last month when Jennifer Adams started shadowing her during meetings, asking detailed questions about client relationships and campaign strategies. The writing had been on the wall, but she'd chosen to ignore it, believing her track record would protect her. Morrison's silence confirmed everything. 8 years of building Sterling Tech's marketing department from the ground up, of pulling all-nighters to meet impossible deadlines, of mentoring junior staff, all dismissed in favor of nepotism wrapped in corporate jargon. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice trembling now not from fear but from anger. "But fine. Let's see how far Daddy's little girl gets without the team I built or the clients I cultivated." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out, leaving behind 15 years of professional achievements reduced to a single afternoon's worth of HR paperwork. The drive home blurred together in a haze of red lights and white-knuckled grips on the steering wheel. 8 years. Gone. Just like that. She barely registered parking the car or climbing the stairs to her apartment, where she finally allowed herself to collapse onto the couch, staring at the ceiling while the reality of her situation settled over her like a suffocating blanket. The first week after the termination felt like moving through molasses. Sarah spent hours staring at job listings, each one feeling more hollow than the last. The industry grapevine worked quickly. Within days, everyone knew about Sterling Tech's leadership transition. Recruiters called, sure, but their offers came with subtle warnings. "We love your experience, but..." Or "Your track record is impressive, however." However what? However, she'd been fired to make room for someone with better connections? Better last name? She deleted each voicemail after listening to the first 30 seconds. The shame burned hottest at night, when she lay awake replaying every meeting, every campaign, every success she'd handed Sterling Tech on a silver platter. They'd thrown it all away for Jennifer Adams and her MBA from some prestigious university whose name Sarah couldn't even remember anymore. During the day, she maintained appearances. Morning runs became longer, coffee dates with friends stretched into marathon sessions dissecting the injustice of it all. But beneath the surface, something darker stirred. The unfairness gnawed at her, transforming sleepless nights into brainstorming sessions. If Sterling Tech didn't want her expertise, then screw them. She'd show them exactly what they were losing. Her laptop became her constant companion. Every spare moment was spent researching, planning, sketching out ideas that had been gathering dust in the back of her mind. Remember that proposal she'd pitched last year, the one Morrison had shot down because it was too risky? The market research still lived in her cloud storage. Those innovative campaign strategies she developed but never fully implemented? All there, waiting to be refined. Weeks turned into a month. Sarah's resentment crystallized into determination. She began reaching out to former colleagues, casual contacts, anyone who might listen to her pitch. Most ignored her messages, afraid of burning bridges with Sterling Tech. But a few responded, Mostly junior staff she'd mentored, people who remembered how she'd fought for their promotions or covered for them when they'd messed up big accounts. One evening, while scrolling through old project files, she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. A pattern emerged from the data, inconsistencies in Sterling Tech's quarterly reports that no one had noticed before. Or rather, no one had wanted to notice. The numbers told a story of declining engagement metrics, masked by clever accounting tricks. Without her oversight, without her team's careful management, these cracks would widen. And Jennifer Adams, with her polished presentations and inherited confidence, wouldn't know how to fix them. Sarah's hands hovered over the keyboard as she cross-referenced the data against current market trends. The realization hit her like a freight train: Sterling Tech was heading for disaster, and they wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. The thought should have brought satisfaction, poetic justice for kicking her to the curb. Instead, it filled her with a different kind of dread. Because despite everything, she still cared about the company she'd helped build. She still cared about the people who worked there, many of whom had become surrogate family over the years. As October settled into November, Sarah watched from the sidelines as Sterling Tech began its slow implosion under Jennifer Adams' leadership. The warning signs were subtle at first: minor shifts in client communication patterns, small delays in campaign launches that cascaded into larger scheduling conflicts. But Sarah knew better than anyone how these seemingly insignificant issues could snowball into major problems. She spent her mornings at local coffee shops, watching Sterling Tech employees rush past with growing desperation in their steps. During lunch breaks, she eavesdropped on their conversations: complaints about changing protocols, confusion over new reporting structures, whispered worries about missed deadlines. Each piece of information added another brick to the wall of evidence she was quietly gathering. Jennifer's first major campaign launched in mid-November, a splashy rebranding effort for one of Sterling Tech's biggest clients. Sarah had originally developed the framework for this campaign, but now she watched as Jennifer dismantled key elements that had made it viable. The social media strategy lacked cohesion, the target demographics had been misaligned, and worst of all, the budget allocation completely ignored seasonal purchasing patterns Sarah had identified through years of data analysis. From her vantage point at the corner cafe, Sarah observed the Sterling Tech offices transform into a pressure cooker. Lights burned later each night, delivery drivers brought in more dinner orders, and the recycling bins overflowed with takeout containers. The marketing team she'd trained was running themselves ragged trying to compensate for fundamental flaws in Jennifer's approach. They were smart enough to recognize the problems but lacked the authority to implement solutions. December arrived with a vengeance. The first major client pulled out just before the holidays, citing strategic differences. Sarah recognized the coded language immediately. It was what companies said when campaigns failed spectacularly. 3 days later, another account followed suit. Through her network of contacts, she learned that internal memos were flying around Sterling Tech headquarters, each one more panicked than the last. The finance department had started quietly adjusting projections, trying to cover the revenue shortfalls with creative accounting. What struck Sarah most was how isolated Jennifer seemed to be in her corner office. The young executive rarely left the building anymore, sending assistants to gather feedback from departments instead of engaging directly with her team. When she did emerge, it was usually to deliver hastily conceived solutions that only exacerbated existing problems. The disconnect between leadership and execution grew wider each day. By Christmas week, the situation had escalated beyond mere campaign failures. Key members of Sarah's former team had begun putting out feelers to rival agencies. The institutional knowledge she'd painstakingly built over 8 years was starting to erode, one resignation letter at a time. Even Cheryl from HR had reached out discreetly, seeking advice on how to handle the growing crisis in the marketing department. Yet amidst the chaos, Sarah noticed something unexpected. Her former colleagues, scattered across various teams, had started forming informal support networks. They shared insights during bathroom breaks, coordinated efforts through encrypted messaging apps, and found ways to mitigate damage without alerting upper management. These were the same people she'd mentored, the ones who had initially seemed paralyzed by Jennifer's misguided decisions. Now they were finding their own agency, working to protect the company culture they valued. As January rolled in, bringing with it resolutions and fresh starts, Sarah found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to watch Sterling Tech crash and burn, to see Greg Morrison eat his short-sighted decision at the next board meeting. But another part, the part that had once believed so deeply in the company's mission, recoiled at the human cost of such destruction. The late nights, the stress-related illnesses, the broken families, these weren't just statistics, they were real people she cared about. Every morning, she woke up earlier than necessary, unable to shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something momentous. Her laptop became both a window into Sterling Tech's unraveling and a canvas for her own redemption. She spent hours refining the proposals she'd started drafting in October, incorporating lessons learned from observing Jennifer's mistakes. The data she gathered painted a clear picture. Sterling Tech needed a radical overhaul, not just in its marketing strategy but in its entire approach to client relations and internal communications. Through her network, Sarah learned that Morrison had called an emergency board meeting scheduled for the end of the month. The agenda included reviewing third-quarter projections and discussing potential restructuring options. This was her moment, if she played her cards right. But playing required resources she didn't currently possess. Building a counterproposal substantial enough to present to the board would take money, credibility, and allies willing to publicly support her vision. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was essentially preparing to save the company that had discarded her like yesterday's news. Some days, she laughed bitterly at the cosmic joke. Other days, she marveled at how her perspective had shifted. What had started as bitter resentment had transformed into something more complex, more nuanced. She saw now that Sterling Tech's problems ran deeper than just poor leadership choices. They were systemic issues that had existed long before Jennifer's arrival, merely papered over by temporary successes. February dawned gray and cold, mirroring Sarah's growing anxiety. She'd secured a meeting with two former clients, both of whom had jumped ship from Sterling Tech after the disastrous holiday campaigns. Over coffee, they listened intently as she outlined her observations and proposed solutions. Their initial skepticism melted away as she presented her data-backed strategies, drawing from both her experience at Sterling Tech and her recent analysis of market trends. "I'll admit," said Marcus Chun, former head of digital strategy at Sterling Tech's largest client, "I was skeptical when you reached out. But this..." He tapped the proposal documents spread across the cafe table. "This makes sense. You're addressing the root causes, not just applying band-aids." The endorsement from Marcus and his colleague opened doors Sarah hadn't realized were closed to her. Within a week, she found herself presenting to 3 other major players in the industry, each meeting building momentum for her independent consultancy. Yet with each success, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. She wasn't just building a safety net for herself anymore, she was crafting a lifeline for dozens of former colleagues who continued to reach out, desperate for guidance as Sterling Tech's situation worsened. March brought an unexpected development. Jennifer Adams had resigned, effective immediately. The official statement cited personal reasons, but Sarah's sources indicated a different story. Apparently, Morrison had discovered several critical errors in Jennifer's handling of major accounts, including a $280 million miscalculation in projected earnings from their flagship product line. The mistake had triggered a chain reaction of financial adjustments that threatened to destabilize the entire company. Now, sitting in her modest home office, Sarah stared at the email invitation from Cheryl. The subject line read simply, "Board meeting, your attendance requested." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered her response. The company that had betrayed her trust now sought her expertise to clean up their mess. The irony tasted bitter, yet undeniable opportunity sparkled within the challenge. Through her network, Sarah learned that Morrison had been scrambling to contain the fallout from Jennifer's departure. Emergency meetings with major clients revealed just how deep the damage went. Years of strategic relationships, carefully cultivated by Sarah and her team, had frayed nearly to breaking. Several key accounts teetered on the edge of termination, their patience exhausted by months of mismanagement. The $280 million miscalculation proved particularly devastating. It wasn't just a simple accounting error, it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of market dynamics that had been building for months. Jennifer's insistence on aggressive sales projections, combined with her team's reluctance to challenge her assumptions, had created a perfect storm of inflated expectations. When reality failed to match these projections, it triggered automatic penalties in several high-stakes contracts. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues. Marketing managers described how their teams worked around the clock, trying to salvage campaigns that had veered wildly off course. Account executives relayed stories of clients demanding explanations for discrepancies in service levels and deliverables. Even departments that had previously operated independently of marketing found themselves affected by the ripple effects of poor decision-making. What struck Sarah most was how quickly Sterling Tech's corporate culture had deteriorated. The collaborative spirit she'd fostered over years had been replaced by a climate of fear and finger-pointing. Employees hoarded information rather than sharing insights, terrified of becoming scapegoats for the growing crisis. Junior staff, sensing instability, began jumping ship in increasing numbers, taking valuable institutional knowledge with them. Financial reports obtained through discreet channels painted an even bleaker picture. The combination of lost accounts, penalty fees, and decreased productivity had created a cash flow crisis that threatened to spiral out of control. Morrison had already initiated rounds of cost-cutting measures, but these only served to exacerbate morale issues and operational inefficiencies. Yet amid the chaos, Sarah detected something remarkable. Her former team, scattered across different departments and increasingly disillusioned with management, had started organizing themselves in unprecedented ways. They formed underground networks, sharing information and coordinating efforts to protect client relationships. Some had taken to documenting every misstep, creating a comprehensive record of the company's decline under Jennifer's leadership. These developments complicated Sarah's position. On one hand, Sterling Tech's predicament validated everything she'd warned about. On the other, she couldn't ignore the human cost of the crisis. Talented professionals trapped in a sinking ship, struggling to keep their heads above water while management flailed desperately for solutions. The very people she'd mentored and protected now faced uncertain futures, their careers potentially derailed by forces beyond their control. As she prepared her presentation for the upcoming board meeting, Sarah grappled with these conflicting realities. The company that had betrayed her trust now stood on the brink of collapse, its survival potentially dependent on the very expertise they dismissed. More importantly, the fate of dozens of dedicated professionals hung in the balance, their livelihoods tied to Sterling Tech's ability to recover from this self-inflicted disaster. April showers drummed against Sarah's office windows as she meticulously organized her findings. The board meeting loomed only days away, and every document, every data point, every testimonial needed to be perfectly positioned to tell the complete story. She'd spent weeks compiling evidence, internal communications showing how warnings had been ignored, client feedback detailing service breakdowns, financial projections demonstrating the widening gap between reality and expectation. Her phone vibrated with another message from Cheryl, confirming the board's growing desperation. Morrison had apparently spent the weekend in emergency meetings with major stakeholders, attempting to stem the tide of account closures. The $280 million miscalculation had become a public relations nightmare, with industry publications speculating about Sterling Tech's future viability. Competitors circled like sharks, poaching talent and clients alike. The scale of the crisis demanded more than just a tactical response. Sarah realized she needed to present a comprehensive transformation plan, one that addressed not only the immediate financial and operational challenges, but also the cultural rot that had allowed such a catastrophic failure to occur. She sketched out a multi-phase strategy that began with stabilizing key accounts and restoring basic operational integrity, then progressed to rebuilding trust with both clients and employees. Each phase required careful consideration of resource allocation. She estimated the immediate costs of damage control, retaining crucial staff, implementing emergency client retention programs, restructuring compensation packages to prevent further brain drain. Then came the harder calculations. How much capital would be needed to overhaul the company's technological infrastructure, how many positions would need to be eliminated or redefined, what level of investment would be required to restore Sterling Tech's reputation in the marketplace. The human element proved most challenging to quantify. Sarah compiled profiles of key personnel, those who had weathered the storm, those who had contributed to it, and those who remained undecided about their future with the company. She drafted plans for re-engagement initiatives, mentorship programs, and leadership development tracks designed to cultivate organic growth rather than relying on external hires. Her network expanded daily, as more former colleagues reached out with inside information or offered to testify about the company's decline. Some provided detailed accounts of specific incidents that illustrated broader systemic issues. Others shared documentation of attempts to raise concerns that had been systematically ignored or dismissed by upper management. Each contribution added depth and credibility to her presentation. Night after night, Sarah refined her approach, testing arguments against potential counterpoints. She anticipated Morrison's defensive posturing, the board's skepticism, and the inevitable pushback from entrenched interests within the company. For every objection she imagined, she prepared multiple responses backed by hard data and real-world examples. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just about proving her worth or exacting revenge for her unjust termination. It was about charting a course that would either save hundreds of jobs or seal Sterling Tech's fate. Each decision she made in crafting her proposal carried profound implications, for the company, for her former colleagues, and ultimately, for her own future in the industry. As she finalized her presentation materials, Sarah recognized that this moment represented more than just a professional crossroads. It was a test of her values, her leadership philosophy, and her ability to transcend personal grievances in pursuit of a greater good. The woman who had once been summarily dismissed now held the power to reshape an entire organization, if she chose to wield it wisely. May arrived with unseasonable warmth, mirroring the rising tension surrounding Sterling Tech's impending board meeting. Sarah spent her days fielding calls from nervous former colleagues, while refining her presentation strategy. Cheryl's updates painted a picture of mounting panic within upper management, canceled vacations, liquidated assets, and frantic attempts to secure emergency funding from major shareholders. Through her network, Sarah learned that Morrison had begun discreetly approaching potential white knight investors, hoping to find a buyer willing to salvage what remained of Sterling Tech. The irony wasn't lost on her. The CEO who had sacrificed experienced leadership for nepotism now sought salvation from outside forces. Each potential deal fell through faster than the last, as due diligence revealed the true extent of the company's structural weaknesses. Her phone buzzed with alarming frequency, bearing messages from former team members describing increasingly desperate measures within the company. Middle management had started implementing unauthorized workarounds to maintain basic operations, while senior staff engaged in quiet rebellion against directives they knew would only worsen the situation. The atmosphere resembled a besieged fortress, with employees forming protective circles around remaining clients and projects. Sarah's presentation materials grew thicker by the day. She incorporated new data points, revised financial projections, and updated risk assessments based on the latest developments. Each refinement brought her closer to a pivotal realization: saving Sterling Tech would require more than just technical expertise or strategic insight. It demanded a fundamental realignment of the company's core values and operating principles. The board meeting invitation now sat prominently on her desk, its weight amplified by the gravity of the decision before her. Accepting meant stepping back into the arena where she'd been so brutally cast aside. Declining would allow the company to continue its downward spiral, potentially dragging hundreds of innocent careers down with it. Neither path promised easy answers or guaranteed outcomes. Her preparations took on an almost ritualistic quality. Each morning began with review sessions of key talking points, followed by practice runs of her presentation. She tested different approaches to sensitive topics, gauging which phrasing elicited the most constructive responses from trusted advisors. The technical aspects of her proposal, the numbers, the charts, the detailed action plans, represented only half the battle. The other half lay in navigating the complex web of emotions, history, and political maneuvering that defined Sterling Tech's current state. Outside her window, spring blossoms burst forth in vibrant colors, contrasting sharply with the storm clouds gathering over Sterling Tech's future. Sarah watched as former colleagues, once confident in their positions, now scrambled to protect their professional legacies. The very culture she'd worked years to establish had unraveled in mere months, replaced by a toxic combination of fear, uncertainty, and recrimination. Yet amidst the chaos, she detected glimmers of hope. Some departments had begun spontaneously organizing recovery efforts, pooling resources and expertise to maintain critical functions. These grassroots initiatives demonstrated the resilience and dedication that still existed within the company's ranks, qualities that could form the foundation for meaningful change if properly nurtured and directed. The date of the board meeting drew nearer, each passing hour amplifying the stakes. Sarah found herself reflecting on the nature of leadership and redemption. Was she ready to extend the olive branch to those who had wronged her? Could she separate personal grievances from professional judgment? Most importantly, did she possess the courage to embrace the complexity of the situation rather than seeking simple vindication? Her final preparations focused on crafting a narrative that transcended technical details and financial projections. She wove together stories of individual struggles and triumphs, illustrating how Sterling Tech's current crisis represented both a cautionary tale and an opportunity for transformation. Each anecdote, each data point, Each proposed solution contributed to a larger vision, one that acknowledged past mistakes while charting a course toward sustainable growth and renewed purpose. As she finalized her presentation, Sarah recognized that this moment represented more than just a professional reckoning. It marked a profound test of her ability to rise above circumstances, to transform adversity into opportunity, and to demonstrate that true leadership emerges not from holding grudges but from embracing the messy, imperfect process of genuine change. The woman who had once been dismissed as expendable now stood poised to redefine what it meant to lead with authenticity and vision.